Hi everybody, and welcome to Readers of the Lost Art, Les Amuse Bouche. Bite-sized pieces from the chef's imagination that don't belong on the main menu. Today we're going to look at Claude Monet's Grainstack Snow Effect from 1891, which I saw many years ago in person in the National Gallery of Scotland in Edinburgh. And by the way, for any North American viewers, it's Edinburgh, not Edinburgh. Just thought I'd get that off my chest. It's bothered me for decades. Anyway, this is obviously the painting. And I just wanted to talk today, if you have a good nice longer look at it, I wanted to talk about why this meant so much to me personally. And sorry to ruin it with my fizzog, but I remember seeing this. How old was I? I must have been, I'm guessing, let's see, round about maybe 25, 26. And I used to periodically go to art galleries, but not that much. And I think I had a friend visiting, so I was desperate to find something to do to entertain them. And we went to the National Gallery, and I came in front of this, and just remember, this is Edinburgh, and outside it was deathly dark. It's lots of granite buildings in the city, so when it's dark, it's really dark, and it probably doesn't rain for about 5 days a year, and there isn't swirling wind for about 3 days a year. And it was a typically bleak day, pouring down with rain, really cold, really dark. It was about 2:30 in the afternoon in August from memory. I'm kidding. But you come across this, and as ever with, the way I like to talk about paintings, I like to give the depressing angle. And this depresses me every time I see it, only because I think it's a beautiful, beautiful painting. But once you've seen it in person, it really brought home to me how there isn't a substitute for just seeing art in its natural habitat. It's a bit like, I've got loads and loads of expensive art books that, cost me a fortune that I didn't have at the time. But the reproductions, no matter how good they are, or no matter how good your HD XXX television is, it just doesn't get the quality across of actually being physically in front of a painting like this. So there's that element of it. No matter how much you're trying to learn about art, no matter how many books, etc. you buy, you just can't replicate. And the chances to see some of these paintings, this one's a good one to go and visit, because Edinburgh's not, it is a touristy town, but not half as bad, the galleries there, as, some more southernly, better climate galleries in Italy, for example, or even Spain. And the overwhelming sense I got from this was a notion of the sublime. And I won't, because this is bite-sized, this is an amuse-bouche, I won't go into lots of depth about the sublime, but there's two types of sublime. One is in the philosophy of art anyway. And the two biggest thinkers originally about the notion of the sublime are probably Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher, and Edmund Burke, the British philosopher. And one of the discussions with the notion of the sublime is that there's the dynamic sublime and there's the mathematical sublime. So the mathematical sublime is a sense of scale, that you have sublime feelings when you're confronted with immense scale. And often that obviously has to do with nature. And then there's the dynamic sublime, which is, I guess, if you're in the middle of a storm. The time I got a sense of the dynamic sublime was I was in Greece, and it wasn't going to be dramatic, it wasn't a huge earthquake, but it was a minor earthquake. And I'd never experienced an earthquake before, a proper one anyway. And the overwhelming sense I got was it sounds stupid, but when the actual earth you're standing on that you've always used as your frame of reference, when that actually wobbles, it has a more profound effect than I ever would have thought it would. Not because buildings were shaking and, masonry was falling down. It wasn't a big enough earthquake. But the floor wobbled, and instantaneously I lost all grounding that I'd previously taken for granted. So I say all that about notions of the sublime because this, innocuous as it looks, I got a sense of the sublime when I saw this, because what you don't get, and you can only get in person, is the way the light comes off the Grainstack, sorry. It's luminescent. It's a winter's lighting conditions and the reflection, and how an artist like Monet, with just a paintbrush and pigments, can actually produce that effect on a piece of canvas. It didn't shake me. I didn't clutch my pearls, but it had an effect on me. And then it made me think of all the other times, not a huge amount of times, but the other times I've experienced the sublime. The most affected I think I've ever been by the sublime, and this is an example of the mathematical sublime, was at the north ridge of the Grand Canyon. And if there's anyone from North America who hasn't been to the Grand Canyon, please make the effort, because you're already over there. For British people, it's obviously much more difficult. And I was 21. We'd got a car from a drive-away, I think they call them. I was a student for the year on an exchange scheme scholarship. And me and 4 other people drove a car from Philadelphia to Los Angeles over about 5 or 6 days, I think it was. And halfway, well, not halfway, I'm guessing 2/3 away across, you hit the Grand Canyon. And it was just, to say it, the cliche, took my breath away. It was a strange feeling, because by the end, dusk was falling, and the Americans, there's 3 Americans and 2 British people, and without using national stereotypes, me and the other English guy were just gobsmacked, would be the English phrase. We sat for hours just looking at it. And it was the Northridge. I don't know what it's like now, but this is it. What I'm trying to think, this might have been 1990 roughly. 1989, it must have been the summer of 1990, I'm guessing. No, not that it matters to you lot, but it was actually the summer of 1988. And we're looking, me and this other English guy, I think the Northridge is more it's not as developed, at least it wasn't then, as the Southern Ridge, I think, is more popular. And I don't think it's as big as the Southern Ridge, the Northern Ridge, but it's stunning still, massive, 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 and beautiful. So the Americans, when dusk was falling, just went into the car in a sulk, because me and this other English guy who just didn't want to leave where we were sat there distant from each other, just so we could enjoy it. And it gave me this feeling in the pit of my stomach that that's the best way I can find to describe it. It wasn't a conceptual mental feeling if you read a lot and live inside your own head all the time. It's much more, I think, what they call a somatic response. And it was, you feel it in the pit of your stomach. And I'm trying to think of other examples that aren't as dramatic as the Grand Canyon, and actually are quite different. So another example would be, it sounds daft, but if you ever get to see, there's a group called the Kodo Drummers, who are traditional Japanese drummers, and they take, they use various sized drums, but the finale of their performance is these massive drums they come out with, and they have massive thick sticks that they rhythmically beat the drums with, building up to crescendo. And in audio terms, I think bass is non-directional, so you don't really hear bass, you feel it. And when this guy starts beating the biggest drum, you feel the best way I can describe it is you feel the sound in the pit of your stomach, and the hairs on the back of your neck go up. And that was from an audio version of Feeling the Sublime. So it's odd that it could have, just a painting like this could actually have that effect. But I can't think of another art form that, by tricking you in the nicest possible way, it's tricking you into thinking there's 3 dimensions when there's only 2, and tricking your eye into thinking it's seeing reflected light from a light source that I emphasise in the darkest summer's day in Edinburgh didn't actually exist in reality. To see that light coming as if it was alive when you know it isn't, or not alive, you know what I mean, a real atmospheric, real life situation that actually isn't, it's just a representation. But that was the overwhelming sense. And what makes me, again, so that's the emotional response, but from a practical, well, from a more conceptual point of view, what always struck me about this painting was the way in which Monet, in various different subject matter, would do again and again and again. So the water lilies he'd paint again and again and again. He did lots of Grainstacks at different times of year, different lighting conditions. But it was, I would argue, that is vastly different to another aspect of images, but this time in contemporary life. So this is the quote from, I think it was the Italian was L'Avventura di Fotografia, but Italo Calvino, as early as 1958. And it's a very funny short story, and this is a little excerpt. The minute you start saying something, how beautiful, we must photograph it, you are already close to the view of the person who thinks that everything that is not photographed is lost, as if it had never existed, and that therefore, in order really to live, you must photograph as much as you can. And to photograph as much as you can, you must either live in the most photographable way possible, or else consider photographable every moment of your life. The first course leads to stupidity, the second to madness. Now, I'd actually argue that the current modern condition, contemporary condition, is halfway between stupidity and madness. So I call it insta-angst. And I love to do, I'll do a deep, full-bodied, no, definitely not an amuse-bouche, but I'll do a heavy goulash of a talk about the whole concept of angst at some point. But insta-angst it's my way of describing this obsession with, as Calvino points out, he's just talking about photographs. And so imagine how much worse it's got. He had a single lens reflex camera that had to be developed. So the fact that everyone's got a smartphone, everyone's taking pictures all the time of everything, it's an exponentially worse situation. And it's summed up by this beautiful quote from, this was a Christopher Isherwood novel, Goodbye to Berlin, 1939. I am a camera with its shutter open, quite passive, recording, not thinking. So that's the first page of the novel from memory. And on the back of this, it was, what was the name of the play? I think there was a play, this is 1939, in 1951, a play was made based upon this initial idea from the first page. I think it was called I Am a Camera. So it's an adaptation of this idea. And it came out in 1951 on Broadway, I believe. And one of the theatre critics, it's one of my favourite titles for a review, the theatre critic said, I Am a Camera, the new play. Me no liker. Which, if you know anything about photography and camera makes, is vaguely funny, for me at least. But this idea that, I just think that's a great summary of, I was going to say your average teenager, because I'm very down on the teenagers, but nearly everyone now. I can't think of any social event where people aren't gormlessly pointing a mobile phone as if like a magic totem. It's bizarre. Like, whatever your politics at various protests, people just film everything as if that's going to offer them some type of protection to the events that are actually happening. So what I'm doing is I'm contrasting that there's this type of obsessive recording of images, which I've written about as an academic. I've always been interested in the tsunami of images that surround us. And I've always found art, even at its most manic. So what Monet is doing is painting again and again and again. But he's producing something of value. He's producing something that's trying to capture the essence of our existence in a beautiful way. Whereas me no liker. This type of approach, me definitely no liker. So back to the painting. I'll just leave that. I'll slowly get myself out the way. But I encourage you just to, because Monet falls into the trap, not his fault, but of, being used for top of biscuit tins and tea towels, and often experienced in quite saccharine, schmaltzy ways. When, if you ever get the chance, go and see Monet paintings in real life. And I'm pretty confident it would actually change your whole appreciation, definitely of Monet's quality, but probably art in general. Well, thanks very much indeed.